Wagner was never a person to underestimate himself or under-advertise himself. He wrote a letter to Liszt while he was writing the first act of Valkyrie. And he said, without a hint of a blush, "This is the most beautiful music that has ever been written by anyone." And of course the problem with Wagner is often he's right in his own self-estimation. It's certainly a revolution in music, a revolution in music theatre and the psychological use of music in theatre. And although his music up to this point had contained many kinds of beauty, there was never something quite as wild as the music of the first act. It was written in such a white heat, basically between July and the 1st of September. In fact, the whole Valkyrie was written from July to the end of December in 1 year. And it's fairly ironic because, in fact, the libretto of the Ring operas had taken him a quarter of a century to complete. He'd started at the end with Götterdämmerung and worked back to the beginning, realizing, rather like the creators of the Star Wars films, that there was a real necessity to explain what had happened beforehand and go on further. But once he was finally able to find what kind of music he wanted to write, what type of techniques could actually express what he had in mind, it obviously just flowed at the rate of molten lava. And although the first act is over an hour, it feels as though there's no pause for breath. The piece is written in an astonishing arch from beginning to end. And performing it, it's always such a shock when you realize, my God, we're in the last 5 minutes of this. You start the beginning of this colossal storm thinking how much there is ahead of you. And somehow it just produces itself. I wouldn't say it plays itself. It's a very, very tricky score to play. But it has a type of energy behind it which is absolutely irresistible to play. I'm not going to try to tell the story because well nigh impossible, but certain things to think about throughout the Ring. Wagner's attitude towards marriage and love, rarely the same things. Certainly when you think about Sieglinde's marriage to Hunding, it seems to be a kind of institutionalized rape. And in fact, the subject of rape comes up distressingly frequently throughout the Ring, both in, even right from the start, Alberich's attempt to rape either or any of the Rhine maidens in turn, and then somehow the symbolic rape of the gold by him, his stealing this, and indeed Wotan's complementary stealing, rape of the gold, rape of the power. And somewhere there's the feeling in Wagner that true love must be something else. True love is not to do with institutions, it's not to do with power. And the true love that there is within these operas is either between brother and sister, in the case of Sieglinde and Siegmund, or whatever it is, grandson and aunt. I mean, who knows what the relationship between Brunhilde and Siegfried actually would be, apart from illegal. But these are not people who survive. They are destroyed along with everything. When Wagner writes, I saw the end of the world come, as he does for Brünnhilde, he also refers to all the human relationships within this. Siegmund and Sieglinde are destroyed. At the end, Siegfried, Brünnhilde, everything is destroyed. And at the same time, there is the most ecstatic, human, warm music to describe this. Here is the great dichotomy of Wagner and the great puzzle. However pessimistic he was, particularly under the influence of Schopenhauer by the end of his life, however pessimistic, the music tells another story. The kind of picture that is painted not only by the singers but more importantly by the opera of the coming of love, the coming of spring, this almost physically feelable light within the music is something completely astonishing. And it's interesting how he chooses even to orchestrate in the first act. As any flute player will tell you, they have 35 minutes where they don't play at all after the beginning of the storm. Many of the high instruments don't play. The violins even play very little. It's for a very, very dark group of violas, cellos, basses, clarinets, bassoons, horns, and particularly Wagner tubas to tell this awful, baleful person who is Hunding. The way the instruments have to play tell you everything you need to know about Hunding, this man of property and power and violence. And Siegmund and Sieglinde, illegal as they are, the first incest on the romantic stage, they are the figures who really love and are really human. And Wagner painted them with a type of music that nobody, not even he, had managed to come up with before. The depth of characterization of the personalities in this music is, I would say, unparalleled since Mozart. When you hear the astonishing scene in Act 2 between Fricka and her husband, and make no mistake, we know we're watching the complete implosion of a marriage, that this is the end of a relationship that must have been loving in some form at some time. But to hear how she is painted, not only as a shrew, but as a very, very angry woman, and frankly, one of the only people in the ring who is always telling the truth. The different colors, the way in which he is orchestrated, the way in which he uses the consonants, his repeated consonants. She is an amazing painting, and she changes from moment to moment. There's a very, very powerful moment at the end where Fricka realizes that Brünnhilde is there. And she turns into some kind of public guardian of morality. And the whole music changes underneath her with these triplets. And she speaks in a way that suddenly anyone of my generation would associate with Margaret Thatcher. She says, this is the moral truth, and this is what will be upheld. There is no turning back. When she's finished, and Wotan realizes not only that his son is lost, but somewhere he realizes that this is really the beginning of the end of everything. And he says, take my oath. And there's a little passage of music after it which encapsulates in about 12 or 13 bars the entire end of a relationship, the hope, the rise, the fall, and the complete blackness that follows.